You know what time it is. Woo! Get into it! Get into it! Yes! We are back, lovelies. We are back with Storytime with Chris. Hi. I am enjoying a lovely Tuesday. Hi, thank you for joining us for Storytime with Chris. Like I always say, you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. You're more than welcome to watch them in your downtime, nap time, max and relax and chillaxing time, study time, break time, in between time, CP time, any time that you want to hear a highly animated voice bring you wonderful stories of magic, fantasy, adventure, science fiction, and many, many more in between. I am back, y'all. I was out of town for about, technically speaking, for about a week and a half. I was in Cleveland for my sister's wedding. My god sister Raya got married, and it was just beautiful. I am going to post pictures, so please bear with me. But I had an amazing time. It was just great to be there with my godmother and my youngest brother, and my sister-in-law was there, and my youngest niece, and mom was there looking, all of us looking gorgeous, just fabulous. Everybody was very well dressed. It was a beautiful event. It was cool to meet so many different people that's connected to Raya, and some new faces and some old faces I got to see. It was just a great time. And I got to go and see my grandmother and help her out and clean around the house. Let me just give you a fun fact about me. I don't care how old I get, I will always love cleaning. I love cleaning. I think it's fun. And I pretty much have to blame... Actually, yeah, I do have to blame two Disney characters. So it would be Cinderella and Mary Poppins, because Mary Poppins would always say, well, it all depends on your point of view. For every job that must be done, there is an element of fun. You find the fun and snap. The job's a game. And then Cinderella would always sing as she was cleaning, especially in the scene where she's washing the front foyer floor in the main hall of the house. She's playing with the bubbles and she's like, sing, sweet nightingale, sing, sweet nightingale, high above me. Sorry, my voice is not warmed up yet, so I do apologize. Oh, sing, sweet nightingale, sing, sweet nightingale, high above. Oh, sing, sweet nightingale. Oh, sing, sweet. Oh, sing, sweet nightingale. Those two movies really helped me fall in love with cleaning. I just find it to be fun. It's relaxing. And I don't think it's ever wrong to enjoy being domestic. I think everybody has their own niche of what they enjoy doing. Some people love to do photography. Other people love to cater food and make great dishes. Some people love to teach people how to improve their physical health, being a personal trainer. Some people are sketch artists. Some people are joggers. Some people are gardeners. Some people are dog watchers or cat watchers. Whatever you love to do, as long as you're loving it and having fun, can't nobody tell you otherwise. Or playing video games, or puzzle solving at home, or playing board games. As long as you're having fun, that's the important thing. So we're back with Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. We only have one chapter left after this reading today, and I am quite excited because it's about to be very, very action-packed, because Klaus has yet again been hypnotized by Dr. Georgina Orwell and Count Olaf, disguised as Shirley, and how Sir told the Baudelaire orphans, like, if there's another accident, I'm going to give you full custody to the secretary at Dr. Orwell's office named Shirley. And I'm like, that's terrible. Like, you don't even know this woman well enough to think that she could handle 3 kids, let alone a kid. So we are about to enter a scene where Klaus is still hypnotized, has tied up Charles, Sir's business partner, to the log cutter, It's this big saw that like slices logs in half, and he's tied up, and Klaus is about to chop him up, so to speak. So now Violet and Sunny have to stop him before it gets worse. Chapter 12. Klaus! Violet cried. Klaus, don't do it! Foreman Flacatano whirled around, his beady eyes glaring from over his surgical mask.
Well, if it isn't the other two dwarves, he said, you're just in time to see the accident.
It's not an accident, Violet said. You're doing it on purpose.
Let's not split hairs,
the foreman said, using an expression which here means argue over something that's not at all important. You've been in on this all the time, Violet shouted. You're in cahoots with Dr. Orwell and Shirley.
So what?
Foreman Flacatano said.
Delaney!
Sunny shrieked, which meant something along the lines of, you're not just a bad foreman, you're an evil person.
I don't know what you mean, little dwarf,
Foreman Flacatano said.
And I don't care. Klaus, you lucky boy, please continue.
No, Klaus! Violet shouted. No!
Couture!
Sunny shrieked.
Your words will do no good, Foreman Flacatano said. See?
Sunny saw right as she watched her barefoot brother walked over to the log as if his sisters had not spoken. But Violet was not looking at her brother. She was looking at Foreman Flacatano and thinking of everything he had said. The terrible foreman was right, of course. The words of the two unhypnotized Baudelaires would do no good, but Violet knew that some words would help. The book she was holding had told her in between hmms that there was a word that was used to command Klaus, and a word that would unhypnotize him. The eldest Baudelaire realized that Foreman Flacatano must have used the command word just now, and she was trying to remember everything that he had said. He called Klaus a twerp, but he seemed unlikely that twerp would be the word. He said log, and he said push, but that didn't seem likely either. She realized with despair that the command word could almost be anything.
That's right,
Foreman Flacatano said as Klaus reached the log.
Now, in the name of Lucky Smell's lumber mill, push the log in the path of the saw.
Violet closed her eyes and racked her brain, a phrase which here means try to think of other times the command word must have been used. Foreman Flacatano must have used it when Klaus caused the first accident, the one that broke Phil's leg.
You lucky dwarf.
Violet remembered the foreman had said, we'll be operating the machine, and Klaus had said, yes, sir, in the faint, hypnotized voice. The same voice he had used before he had gone to sleep just the previous night.
Eagle!
Sunny shrieked in fear, as the of the saw grew louder and rougher. Klaus had pushed the log up to the saw, and Charles's eyes grew even wider as the blade began to slice the wood, getting closer and closer to where Charles was tied up. As she remembered Klaus's yes, sir, before he went to sleep, Violet realized she must have used the command word herself by accident. She racked her brain again, straining to remember the conversation. Klaus had called her baby sister Susan instead of Sunny, and then asked if he really feel better in the morning. But what had Violet replied?
Keep pushing, you little dwarf! You lucky dwarf,
Foreman Flacatano said, and Violet knew in an instant. Lucky. Lucky! The eldest Baudelaire shouted, not bothering to hide the word in a sentence, as the foreman did. Push the log away from the saw, Klaus. Yes, sir, Klaus said quietly, and the Baudelaire sisters saw with relief that he pushed the log away from the whirling blade just as Charles's toes were about to be sliced. Foreman Flacatano whirled around and stared at Violet in beady rage. She knew that he knew that she knew.
Lucky!
He snarled.
Push the log back toward the saw, Klaus.
Yes, sir, Klaus muttered. Lucky! Violet cried. Push the log away! Yes, sir, Klaus murmured.
Lucky!
Foreman Flacatano barked.
Toward the saw!
Lucky away!
Lucky toward the saw!
Lucky away!
Lucky toward the saw!
Lucky! Bellowed a new voice from the doorway, and everyone, including Violet, Klaus, Sunny, and Foreman Flacatano, turned around. Even Charles tried the best he could do to see Dr. Orwell, who had appeared in the doorway, along with Shirley, who was lurking behind the hypnotist. We just stopped by to make sure everything went well, Dr. Orwell said, gesturing to the saw with her black cane. I'm certainly glad we did, Lucky, she shouted to Klaus. Do not listen to your sisters.
What a good idea,
Foreman Flocatano said to the doctor.
I never thought of that.
That's why you're only a foreman, Dr. Orwell replied snobbily. Lucky Klaus pushed the log in the path of the saw. Yes, sir, Klaus said and began to push the log again. Please, Klaus, Violet cried, don't do this.
Guys,
Sonny shrieked, which meant, don't hurt Charles. Please, Dr. Orwell, Violet cried, don't force my brother to do this terrible thing. It is a terrible thing, I know, Dr. Orwell said, but it's a terrible thing that the Baudelaire fortune goes to you three brats. Instead of to me and Shirley, we're going to split the money 50-50.
After expenses, Georgina,
Shirley reminded her. After expenses, of course, Dr. Orwell said. The hum of the saw began making its louder, rougher sound as the blade started to slice the log once more. Tears appeared and Charles' eyes began to run down the string tying him to the log. Violet looked at her brother and then at Dr. Orwell and dropped the heavy book on the ground in frustration. What she needed now, and most desperately, was the word that would unhypnotize her brother, but she had no idea what it could be. The command word had been used many times, and Violet hadn't been able to figure out which word had been used over and over. But Klaus had not only been unhypnotized once after the accident that had broken Phil's leg, she and her sister had known in the moment he started defining a word for the employees, that Klaus was back to normal. But who knew what word caused him that afternoon to suddenly stop following Foreman Flocatano's orders? Violet looked from Charles's tears to the ones appearing in Sonny's eyes as the fatal accident grew nearer and nearer. In a moment it seemed they would watch Charles die a horrible death, and then they would most certainly be placed in Shirley's care after so many narrow escapes from Count Olaf's treachery. This seemed to be the moment of his, or in this case, her, terrible triumph. Out of all the situations Violet thought to herself that she and her siblings had been in, this was the most miserably irregular. It was the most miserably immoderate. It was the most miserably disorderly. It was the most miserably excessive. And as she thought all these words, she thought of the one that had unhypnotized Klaus, the one that just might save all of their lives.
Inordinate,
she shouted as loudly as she could to be heard over the terrible noise of the saw.
Inordinate! Inordinate! Inordinate!
Klaus blinked and then looked all around around him as if somebody had just dropped him in the middle of the mill. Where am I? He asked.
Oh, Klaus,
Violet said in relief.
You're here with us.
Drat, Dr. Orwell said. He's unhypnotized. How in the world would a child know a complicated word like inordinate?
These brats know lots of words,
Shirley said in a ridiculously fake high voice.
They're book addicts, but we can still create an accident and win the fortune.
Oh, no, you can't, Klaus cried and stepped forward to push Charles out of the way.
Oh, yes, we can,
Foreman Flocatano said and stuck his foot out again. You would think that such a trick would work only a maximum of 2 times, but in this case, you would be wrong. In this case, Klaus fell to the floor again, his head clanging against the pile of debarkers and tiny green boxes. Oh, no, you don't, Violet cried and stepped forward to push Charles out of the way herself.
Oh, yes, we can,
Shirley said in her silly high voice and grabbed Violet's arm. Foreman Flocatano quickly grabbed her other arm, and the eldest Baudelaire found herself trapped.
Oh, tonight!
Sonny cried and crawled towards Charles. She was not strong enough to push the log away from the saw, but she thought she could bite through his string and set him free. Oh, yes, we can, Dr. Orwell said, and reached out to grab the youngest Baudelaire, but Sonny was ready. Quickly, she opened her mouth and bit down on the hypnotist's hand as hard as she could. Go! Dr. Orwell shouted, using an expression that is of no particular language. But then she smiled and used an expression that was in French. En garde! En garde! As you may know, is an expression people use when they wish to announce the beginning of a sword fight, and with a wicked smile, Dr. Orwell pushed the red jewel on top of her black cane, and a shiny blade emerged from the opposite end. In just 1 second, her cane had become a sword, which she then pointed at the youngest Baudelaire orphan. But Sonny, being only an infant, had no sword. She only had her 4 sharp teeth, and looking at Dr. Orwell right in the eye, she opened her mouth and pointed all 4 at this despicable person. There's a loud clink noise that a sword makes when it hits another sword, or in this case, a tooth. And whenever I hear it, I am reminded of a sword fight I was forced to have with a television repairman not long ago. Sonny, however, was only reminded of how much she did not want to be sliced to bits. Dr. Orwell swung her cane sword at Sonny, and Sonny swung her teeth at Dr. Orwell, and soon the clink, Its noises were almost as loud as the saw machine, which continued to saw up the log towards Charles. Clink! Up, up! The blade inched it until it was only a hair's breadth. The expression hair's breadth here means a teeny tiny measure away from Charles's foot. Klaus! Violet cried, struggling in the grips of Shirley and Foreman Flacotano. Do something!
Your brother can't do anything,
Shirley said, giggling in a most annoying way.
He's just been unhypnotized. He's too dazed to do anything. Foreman Flacotano, let's both pull. We can make Violet's armpits sore that way.
Shirley was right about Violet's sore armpits, but she was wrong about Klaus. He had just been unhypnotized, and he was quite dazed, but he wasn't too dazed to do anything. The trouble was, he simply couldn't think of what to do. Klaus had been thrown into the corner with the debarkers and the gum, and if he moved in the direction of Charles or Violet, he would walk right into Sonny and Dr. Orwell's sword fight, and as he heard another clink from the sword hitting Sonny's tooth, he knew he would be seriously wounded if he tried to walk through the dueling pair. But over the clinks he heard an even louder, even rougher noise from the sawing machine, and Klaus saw with horror that the blade was beginning to slice through the soles of Charles's shoes. Sir's partner tried to wiggle his feet away from the blade, but they were tied too tightly, and tiny shoe sole shavings began to fall to the floor of the mill. In the moment the blade would be finished with the sole of Charles's shoe and begin on the sole of Charles's foot. Klaus needed to invent something to stop the machine, and he needed to invent it right away. Klaus stared at the circular blade of the saw, and his heart began to sink. How in the world did Violet do it? Klaus had a mild interest in mechanical things, but at heart he was a reader, not an inventor. He simply did not have Violet's amazing inventing skills. He looked at the machine and just saw a deadly device, but he knew that if Violet were in this corner of the mill and not getting sore armpits from Shirley and Foreman Flacotano, she would see a way to help them out of their situation. Klaus tried to imagine how his sister would go about inventing something right there on the spot, and tried to copy her methods. Clink! Klaus looked around him for inventing materials, but saw only debarkers and tiny green boxes of gum. Immediately, he ripped open a box of gum, shoved several pieces into his mouth, chewing ferociously. The expression, gum up the works, does not actually have to do with gum, but merely refers to something that stops the progress of something else. Klaus chewed and chewed the gum, hoping that the stickiness of the gum could gum up the works of the sawing machine and stop the deadly progress of its blade. Clink! Sonny's third tooth hit the blade of Dr. Orwell's sword, and Klaus quickly spat the gum out of his mouth into his hand and threw it at the machine as hard as he could, but it merely fell to the ground with a wet plop. Klaus realized that gum didn't weigh enough to reach the machine. Like a feather or a piece of paper, the wad of gum simply couldn't be thrown very far. The machine began making the loudest and roughest sound Klaus had ever heard. Charles closed his eyes, and Klaus knew that the blade must have hit the bottom of his foot. He grabbed a bigger handful of gum and shoved it into his mouth, but he didn't know if he could chew enough to make a heavy enough invention. Unable to watch the saw any longer, he looked down, and when his eyes fell upon one of the debarkers, he knew he could invent something after all. When Klaus looked at the lumber mill equipment, he remembered a time when he was even more bored than he had been when working at Lucky Smells. This especially boring time had happened a very long time ago, when the Baudelaire parents were still alive. Klaus had read a book on different kinds of fish, and asked his parents if they would take him fishing. His mother warned him that fishing was one of the most boring activities in the world, which is not true. Fishing is actually a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite activities to do growing up. But found 2 fishing poles in the basement and agreed to take him to a nearby lake. Klaus had been hoping that he would get to see the different types of fish he had read about, but instead he and his mother sat in a rowboat in the middle of a lake and did nothing for an entire afternoon. He and his mother had to keep quiet so as not to scare the fish, but there were no fish, no conversation, and absolutely no fun. You might think that Klaus would not want to remember such a boring time, particularly in the middle of a crisis, but one detail in this very boring afternoon turned out to be extremely helpful. Sonny struggled with Dr. Orwell, Violet struggled with Shirley and Foreman Flacotano, and poor Charles struggled with the saw. Klaus remembered the part of the fishing process known as casting. Casting is the process of using one's fishing pole to throw one's fishing line out into the middle of the lake in order to try to catch a fish. In the case of Klaus and his mother, the casting hadn't worked. But Klaus did not want to catch fish. He wanted to save Charles's life. Quickly, the middle Baudelaire grabbed the debarker and spat his gum onto one end of it. He was planning to use the sticky gum as a sort of fishing line and the debarker as a sort of fishing pole in order to throw gum all the way to the saw. Klaus's invention looked more like a wad of gum at the end of a strip of metal than a real fishing pole. But Klaus didn't care how it looked. He only cared whether it could stop the saw. He took a deep breath and cast the debarker the way his mother taught him to cast his fishing pole. Plop! To Klaus's delight, the gum stretched over Dr. Orwell and Sunny, who were still fighting just as a fishing line will stretch out across the surface of a lake. But to Klaus's horror, the gum did not land on the saw. It landed on the string that was tying the wriggling Charles to the log. Klaus watched Charles wriggle and once again reminded of a fish, and it occurred to him that perhaps his invention had worked after all. Gathering up all of his strength, and after working at a lumber mill for a while, he actually had quite a bit of strength for a young boy. He grabbed his invention and pulled. Klaus pulled on his debarker, and the debarker pulled on the gum, and the gum pulled on the log, and to the relief of all 3 Baudelaire orphans, the log moved to one side. It did not move very far, and it did not move very quickly, and it certainly did not move very gracefully, but it moved enough. The horrible noise stopped, and the blade of the saw kept slicing, but the log was far enough out of the way that the machine was simply slicing thin air. Charles looked at Klaus, and his eyes filled with tears, and when Sunny turned to look, she saw that Klaus was crying too. But when Sunny turned to look, Dr. Orwell saw her chance. With a swing of one of her big ugly boots, she kicked Sunny to the ground and held her in place with one foot. Then standing over the infant, she raised her sword high in the air and began to laugh, a loud, horrible snarl of a laugh. "I do believe," she said, cackling, "that there will be an accident in Lucky Smill's lumber mill after all." Dr. Orwell was right. There was an accident at the lumber mill after all. Fatal accident, which is a phrase used to describe one that kills somebody. For just as Dr. Orwell was about to bring her sword down on little Sunny's throat, the door of the lumber mill opened and Sir walked into the room. "What in the world is going on?" he barked, and Dr. Orwell turned to him absolutely surprised. When people are absolutely surprised, they sometimes take a step backward. And taking a step backward can sometimes lead to an accident. Such was the case at this moment, for when Dr. Orwell stepped backward, she stepped into the path of the whirring saw, and there was a very ghastly accident indeed. That, right there, children, is what is referred to as a type of irony. Beautiful. Irony can be very beautiful. There's cosmic irony, situational irony. There's 2 other types of irony, but they're not popping up in my head, unfortunately, so I do apologize. Irony, to be, when something is ironic, it's to describe a situation that is part of something that you didn't think was going to happen or didn't think that would happen to you. So, for example, there's Alanis Morissette, which is one of my favorite music artists of all time. One of, not the, but one of. I have a long list. Alanis Morissette has a song called "Isn't Ironic," and there's a lot of the lyrics are talking about the different forms of irony that happens. And there's one line in the song where this guy, she was like, "Mr. Play It Safe was afraid to fly. He packed his suitcase and kissed his wife and children goodbye. He waited his whole life just to take that flight. And when the plane crashed down, he thought, well, isn't this nice? And isn't this ironic? Don't you think?" And it's ironic because this man in the song never wanted to fly. But then his first time flying, the plane crashes down. He's like, oh wow, well isn't this nice? Isn't it ironic? Don't you think? A little too ironic. Yeah, I really do think. It's like rain on your wedding day. It's a free ride when you already paid. It's some good advice that you just can't take. And who would have thought it figures? And life is a funny way of showing us about ourselves. So irony comes in very different forms, and Dr. Orwell got some cosmic irony going on. She got hers. So, with that being said, I hope you all have a fabulous afternoon. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye, y'all. Enjoy your day, okay? Be good.